6 years have passed since Sean Connery died in his sleep in the Bahamas on Halloween night, 2020. The tributes came fast, the film clips, the Bond retrospectives, the breathless eulogies calling him the greatest screen icon Scotland ever produced. And he was all of those things. But in the years since his death, a fuller picture has continued to surface. Old interviews have gone viral again. His first wife's allegations have found new audiences. And the man behind the myth looks, in the cold light of 2026, nothing like the hero the world spent 60 years celebrating. What his own words reveal, words he never walked back, will change the way you see him forever. Sean Connery came from a world that was rough from the very beginning, and you could feel it in the place that raised him. Fountain Bridge, Edinburgh, was known as the Street of a Thousand Smells, and that name was no exaggeration. A rubber mill pumped out thick black smoke, breweries filled the streets with the sour stink of yeast, and everything mixed with sewage, damp stone, and factory grime until the smell settled into skin and lungs and never quite left. Children played in alleys wet with runoff. Laundry never really came out clean because the dirt was everywhere. This was the world young Tommy Connery, who the world would later call Sean, grew up in. And it was the kind of place that taught you very early that life was not going to be gentle. That hard beginning shaped him fast. The streets were crowded with workers, immigrants, and tougher boys, so growing up meant learning how to defend yourself before you were old enough to understand why. Connery was big, strong, and fearless. People started calling him Big Tam because he could handle himself in a fight and then some. He skipped school, drifted towards cinema dreams at the local picture halls, and found in bodybuilding a way to turn raw energy into something visible. By the time he was 23, he placed third in the tall division at Mr. Universe. That body the world later saw on screen had first been built out of poverty, smoke, and survival. Before any of that though, he was just a boy trying to help his family stay afloat. By age 9, during the hard years of the late 1930s, he was already doing odd jobs, collecting scrap, running errands, bringing home every coin he could earn. At 13, he left school for good and was out before dawn working as a milkman for St. Cuthbert's Co-op, riding through freezing Edinburgh streets with bottles clinking in the dark. The work was heavy, the pay was small, and the mornings began long before most people were awake. But that routine built something in him, stamina, discipline, and a way of carrying on when carrying on was the only option. His father, Joseph Connery, was there and not there at the same time. Joe worked as a truck driver but drifted through family life like a man already half gone, turning up to ask for money and disappearing again into pubs, whiskey, and horse race bets. Connery watched it all with growing anger. He saw his mother, Euphemia, known as Effie, stretching pennies, boiling other people's linens over coal stoves until her hands cracked, all to feed Sean and his younger brother Neil. That kind of upbringing settles deep into a boy. It teaches him not to depend on anyone. It teaches him that if he wants safety, he will have to build it himself. The path to James Bond was never supposed to be his. Ian Fleming had imagined 007 as polished, upper-class, English, and refined. Connery was none of those things. He was a working-class Scot with a rougher accent, a heavier physical presence, and a kind of danger that did not come from manners. Fleming reportedly hated the idea of him in the role at first. Yet that resistance only makes what happened next more powerful. The very qualities that seemed wrong on paper turned out to be exactly what made Bond unforgettable. When the producers watched him walk back to his car after a lunch meeting in 1961, they saw the answer in how he moved: smooth, strong, controlled, and slightly dangerous. That walk told them more than any line reading could have. Dr. No premiered in 1962, and the argument ended instantly. The audience loved him. In time, Fleming not only accepted Connery but gave Bond Scottish roots in a later novel, effectively letting the actor's identity become part of the character's own. The actor did not just play the role well. He altered the character so completely that even its creator had to follow where the performance had led. Bond gave Connery everything and then began to trap him. The pressure was relentless. Fans shouted James Bond at him in the street as if the man himself had disappeared and only the character remained. By the mid-1960s he was exhausted by the machine. During the filming of You Only Live Twice, the strain became especially visible. He was followed constantly, watched constantly, and pulled further into a public identity he did not control. Eventually, he walked away from the gold mine and took the risk of becoming something else. The comeback arrived in 1986 with The Name of the Rose, where he played a monk with the mind of a detective, moving through a dark abbey with calm intelligence. Critics loved the performance. A BAFTA followed, then The Untouchables, where he played Jim Malone, a tough, tired Chicago cop who bent rules and believed in doing whatever was necessary. The Oscar for Best Supporting Actor came with it, and with that single win, the whole story flipped. The man everyone thought was finished had rewritten the terms of his own legacy. But away from the screen, his life was far darker than the glamorous image ever suggested. In 1957, Connery met actress Diane Salento while working on a BBC television play. They married in 1962, right as Dr. No turned him into a global star. What should have been the beginning of a bright life together slowly became something frightening. Salento, an Oscar-nominated actress in her own right, celebrated for her role in the 1963 film Tom Jones, had given up much of her own career to follow Connery to his film sets, cook for his golfing friends, and run the household on his terms. In her autobiography, My 9 Lives, published in 2006, she documented what she endured during those 11 years. The first attack she described happened in Almería, Spain, during the filming of The Hill. She had been dancing and celebrating at a local wedding with cast and crew, and when she returned to their hotel room, she found Connery waiting. According to her account, he struck her repeatedly until she locked herself in the bathroom. He went to sleep without saying a word. She described it not as a single ugly incident but as the beginning of a recognizable pattern: jealousy, control, and violence that grew alongside his fame rather than being softened by it. He described his own attitude on the subject before the ink on any of those allegations was even dry. In a 1965 Playboy interview, Connery stated that he did not think there was anything particularly wrong about hitting a woman, though he added he would not recommend doing it the same way you hit a man. He specified that an open-handed slap was, in his view, justified if all other alternatives had failed. Those words alone would have been enough to define his legacy. But then came the moment that made it impossible to dismiss as a lapse in judgment from a different era. In 1987, Barbara Walters sat across from him on camera and gave him every possible chance to step back from those views. He had been one of the most admired men in the world for 25 years by that point. All he had to do was say the comments were wrong. He did not. Instead, he remained calm, almost cold, and argued that it depended on the situation. He suggested that women were good at provoking conflict and not willing to let things go, and that under those circumstances, his position still held. That interview has been viewed millions of times in recent years. Younger audiences watching it for the first time have described it as genuinely shocking, not just because of what he said, but because of how little he seemed to care that he was saying it. When Connery died on October 31, 2020, tributes flooded in immediately. His widow Micheline Roquebrune, whom he had met in Morocco in 1970 and married in 1975, later revealed that his final months had been marked by dementia. She told the Mail on Sunday that it had taken its toll on him, that he was no longer able to express himself, and that slipping away peacefully in his sleep had been exactly what he had wanted. They had shared 45 years together, and by all accounts that second marriage was steadier and more loving than the first. She called him a model of a man. And yet even as the tributes poured in, the darker parts of his legacy refused to stay in the margins. Social media filled almost immediately with discussions of the Barbara Walters clip, Salento's allegations, and the pattern that his fame had kept hidden for decades. Many who had grown up seeing him as the definition of cool masculinity were encountering the full picture for the first time. Others argued that the media's first wave of obituaries had given his career the spotlight while softening or burying the rest. That tension is what makes his story so complicated and so impossible to reduce to a simple verdict. He was genuinely extraordinary on screen, a man who redefined one of cinema's most iconic roles and then proved he was more than that role ever allowed him to be. His Oscar, his BAFTA, his later work in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, where he played Harrison Ford's emotionally distant but quietly loving father, these were real achievements by a performer of rare magnetism and force. But the man who gave all of that to the world also sat in front of a camera in 1987, at 57 years old, and defended the act of hitting a woman. Not as a young man shaped by a rougher time. Not in a moment of weakness he later regretted. Calmly. Deliberately. On record. His first wife spent years trying to be believed. She was often dismissed. He denied her allegations publicly and consistently, and his star power made denial easy. She died in 2011, 9 years before him, without ever hearing him acknowledge what she had said. 6 years after his death, the truth is no longer surfacing slowly. It is simply there, fully visible, widely shared, and impossible to explain away. The myth of Sean Connery was one of the most powerful Hollywood ever produced. The man behind it was genuinely complicated, genuinely brilliant, and in ways that his own words make undeniable, genuinely troubling. Both things are true. And both deserve to be part of the record. What is perhaps most striking is how long the machinery of fame kept the two sides of his story separated. For decades, journalists, studios, and audiences quietly agreed to emphasize the accent, the swagger, the Oscar, and the legend. The other version, the one where a man defends hitting women on camera and his first wife's memoir sits largely unread by his most devoted fans, was always available. It was never hidden. It simply required people to look, and most chose not to. In an age where those old interviews circulate instantly and reach audiences who have no nostalgia to protect, that choice is no longer available. The full Sean Connery has arrived. And the conversation his legacy now demands is overdue.